So in any case, it gave me a whole new sense of being in the world, and I felt in you, part of you, but yet grown by you. Yeah. And taken in directions that were marvelous for me to bowl, and it really set a new chapter in my life.
Well, I want to just share a little bit about how the appreciative inquiry was never intended to be an intervention theory, like you say, moving into the world and so on. It was really meant, following your call to generative theory, it was kind of a combination of grounded theory building, really intimate relationships with the world, the idea of generative theory. And what we found was that as we began, well, two things. First of all, we raised the question, why the generative incapacity in our field? And it became clear to me it was because we were so locked. One of the reasons was we were so locked in a deficit-based theory of the world. All of the vocabularies of human deficit that Ken, again, wrote about in realities and relationships. And in my own field, it was just the whole world everything was defined as a problem to be solved and so on. And as we began to, just say, let's experiment, let's be playful with our assumptions, Well, maybe the world, maybe organizational life isn't the problem to be solved. No organization was created as a problem. All organizations are centers of human relatedness, alive with infinite imaginative capacity and relational connections and webs of strength and so on. And all of a sudden, all the questions started shifting, Instead of what's wrong with this picture, what is it that gives life to this living system, this living set of relationships when it's most alive and most effective? And what we found was that the more we asked questions like that, and Diana and I and others wrote an encyclopedia of positive questions that has hundreds of questions like that to help lift up an understanding of what gives life to that living system. And it's not positive or negative. It's not, a positive side. It's what is it that gives life to this living system? And what we found was the more we asked questions like that, all kinds of changes began to happen. And all kinds of dialogues would spark and so on. In Cleveland Clinic, when we started this work, all of a sudden we fed back our results to the Board of Governors, and they said, how can we do this with all 10,000 people? We need to really begin to understand. So part of my quest at that time was to say, if we want to move towards more generative theorizing, maybe we need all the voices. Maybe we need to democratize the mind, democratize the knowledge process. And we found that the appreciative inquiry helped do that. And so that was one step in it. But it was never meant as an intervention. But again, inquiry and change are a simultaneous moment, and the minute we start asking questions, attention shifts. We start thinking different thoughts. We start opening up new agendas. And so the second phase in this really was a much more activist approach, where we started realizing what happens if we continuously widen those circles of voices. So one of the phrases that I often lean on from Ken is this idea that, again, that obviously there's no final truth, so what are we after? And he talks about the ever-expanding domains of relatedness, how conversations begin to be shaped and possibilities born in the midst of those dialogues, and it's ever-expanding. And it's a wonderful image, this ever-expanding domain of relatedness. The image last night of the web and all the interconnections that we had and so on. It made me think of the image from the Buddhist metaphor about Indra's net. The story of the universe. The Buddhist story of the universe says that the universe is a vast net, and at the intersection of each node of that net is a jewel, and it's a sparkling, glistening reflection, not of itself, but of all the other jewels. And so you get this imagery of how this ever-expanding domain of relatedness can move. And I think that's where my passion then shifted, was how do we literally create modalities for that kind of inquiry to be ever-expanding and to work in the change perspective at the scale of the whole. Not top-down, not bottom-up, none of those things, but always in configurations of the whole and wider circles of the whole. And, you know, so we developed what's called the Appreciative Inquiry Summit methodology, which is, you know, Diana and I and Jim Ludeman and a few others began to really experiment, you know, where you shut down an entire factory and bring the whole system together, dock workers, truck drivers, CEO, the NGOs that are protesting that organization, the community leaders, the mayor, and create configurations of 500 to 1,000 people, sometimes 2,000 people. A recent one we did had 6,000 people connected with 27 cities around the world. And I have to say, my sense of hope about what we're capable of as human beings just soars every time we do something like this, where you really begin to work from this social constructionist perspective, and the possibilities just start emerging tremendously. And so this notion of this ever-expanding domain of relatedness